With all the talk recently about the 4-day work week, made me wonder, how did the 5-day work week even get started? Well, the 5-day work week appeared as early as I think the 1600s in some European and Asian countries, but it wasn't until the early 1900s, over 100 years ago, that it became prevalent in the United States by a man named Henry Ford. At the time, Henry Ford was tired of losing workers to other industries, to other jobs, so he cut the hours per day from 9 to 8, had them work 8 hours per day, and also doubled their wages. Many of his rivals complained and thought it was anti-competitive or whatnot, but they soon followed suit after they saw the productivity improvements as well as the profitability improvements that Ford was able to achieve by making these changes. So that leads me to a question. If you were able to work only 4 days per week, would you take a pay cut for that? There's actually been some studies about that, and though there is a cohort of people that would do that, it's still said that the vast majority of people would not be willing to take a pay cut in order to work 4 days instead of 5. I just made a video on hybrid work and how it has already started to impact the workplace. I would say it's fundamentally changed the workplace already. I think it's interesting to think how the workplace is continuing to evolve, and part of that evolution might in fact be a shift to a 4-day work week. I talk about that topic and more in this video, so stay tuned. The 4-day work week, how do we get here? I mean, it certainly has been gaining a lot of steam. I would say you really feel like it is more palpable or more on the precipice of becoming standard when huge groups like the UAW have that in a list of their requirements for a new contract. Now, you might know that the most recent contract that was agreed to by the Detroit automakers did not have anything related to a 4-day work week. However, again, I think the important part is that it was included. A lot of things are included many times before they eventually get adopted. So again, I think that that's very telling that it was included there. Even though the UAW wasn't able to get that adopted, other companies have tried it. In fact, there are large scale trials going on throughout the world, and some of those trials are actually to the point where they're able to report back some of the findings. Every company is different, and it works better for some, but what you do find are at least some commonalities. Many folks talked about how they were working more hours per day, and the shift to the schedule was perhaps more challenging than it was expected. Others talked about just being busier throughout the day with less downtime. I would say one positive for sure that I think everybody gets tired of is that they did find that meetings were reduced. I mean, I don't know. I can't think of too many people that would be watching this video that would think that we need more meetings. I think almost everybody would agree that we need fewer. So that's clearly a positive. As you think about how this impacts work and whether or not it's going to be effective or not, I think it's really important to make a distinction between what I'll call office work and what we could call production work. If you think about production work, you're working in a manufacturing firm. If you have a certain amount of time, your output will be proportional to the time spent working on that task. In those circumstances, it's going to be really hard to shift to a 4-day work week because productivity will stay the same, and most likely stay the same in terms of units per hour, but you're going to have fewer hours. I mean, is that going to be acceptable? I don't know. I mean, maybe for certain companies it will be, for others it won't. Some folks might make the argument that with automation we're already getting more efficient and this and that, but there's been a lot of advances in production technology, and the shift hasn't yet been made from a 5-day work week to a 4. So I don't know that that's going to be enough this time. On the office work side of things, it's a completely different scenario. Office work generally, most people would agree that it's always has been and always will be very difficult to measure productivity. In most of the work experiences I've been in, outside of the production environment, the productivity measurements, if you will, are essentially just getting the work done that my boss wants me to or wanted me to in the time frame that he wanted me to. If I was achieving those, then I was quote unquote productive for that week or that month or that year or whatever the time period was. As it relates to office work, I think it would be an easier shift to go from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week. One reason for that, outside of the difficulties in measuring productivity and all the meetings and whatnot, is the concept of Parkinson's law. Essentially, what Parkinson's law says is that if you however long you have, the tasks you have to complete will expand to take up whatever amount of time you have. So if you continue down this argument, if you have a set number of tasks to do in a given work week, you could get them done in 4 days or you could get them done in 5. It just depends on how many days you have to work on those. I think we all have experienced what it's like to try and work 4 days a week. Maybe we, took a vacation day on Friday or this or that. And I will be the first to admit, if I do take a vacation day one day during the week or maybe I travel and I'm not able to get as much done, I definitely feel busier during those other 4 days. Again, that's my personal experience. So it may vary for others, but again, that's my personal experience. I know I've worked in other situations where the norm was to work very hard Monday through Thursday so that Friday could be a little bit easier. That primarily was in a consulting job that I had. We would travel to the client site Monday through Thursday, work long hours during those 4 days so that we could get our billable hours. And then on Friday, it would be much more relaxed. I think that's common in a lot of workplaces. Who doesn't feel like the mood and the atmosphere is a little bit lighter on Friday, with people taking a little bit longer lunches? Again, in the office environment, it seems like the current way that people work leads to an easier shift to a 4-day work week. Now, I'm not saying it's without challenges or no impact to productivity. It's just, again, and maybe this is obvious to everyone, it just seems like it would be a much easier, more logical shift from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week for office type employees and workers. Clearly, different people have different work styles, and my own personal work style, which probably has positives and definitely has negatives as well, is that I tend to get through work pretty quickly. Now, I think the negative here is that sometimes I make a few careless mistakes, or maybe my work isn't as thorough as it could have been if I spent a little bit more time on that. However, again, my work style, it would be almost impossible for me to change at this point, and so it's either you get what you get in terms of my work style. But for my personal work style, it potentially would work very well in a 4-day work week. I could absolutely use those deadlines as the motivation in order to get my work done in 4 days instead of 5. Now, in my current role, there's almost no way I could just have a 4-day work week. The only way I could have a 4-day work week is if all the other people I worked with had a 4-day work week as well, which, I'm not saying it's an impossibility, but it's certainly not happening anytime soon. So as much as me personally, I feel like I could maybe get all my work done in 4 days, there is no way that's happening until it's widespread in the industries and companies and whatnot that I work with on a daily basis. Another interesting point as it relates to a 4-day work week is how many hours will the standard workday be? I think many people, the assumption is 5 days a week and 8 hours a day. Now, how many people actually work those hours? I know a lot of people do. I think a lot of people have, a set, maybe they start at 8 o'clock, they have an hour off for lunch, and they leave the office at 5. And I don't want to say there's no variation, but there's, pretty little variation. I think a lot of other people where it's much less predictable. Sure, they might intend to start at 8, or maybe they do start every day at 8, but when they end is, maybe sometimes 7, maybe sometimes 8, maybe sometimes, as early as 4. So the question of how many hours a day is already difficult because it's so variable for so many people. I think in some industries, they'll say, well, yeah, we have to tell you that workday is going to be 8 hours because, that's, labor laws and whatnot, but you should expect to work more hours. Okay, so if that's the expectation for your company, what would that mean if you have to work only 4 days a week? So you're already working 9 or 10 hours, so So now would you have to work 10 or 12 or even more? I don't really know. I mean, that's just, again, one of the challenges in thinking about how the number of hours per day that you have to work potentially would change if you went from 5 days to 4 days. I think for the production side of things, it's equally important. I mean, I know for a fact that on the production side of things, I think it's a equally interesting or worthwhile concept to explore. One of our portfolio companies, we offered a 4-day, 10-hour per day work week, and a lot of folks just didn't want to do that. And this was shift work, production work. I don't know if it was because they, really did get tired and 8 hours felt right, or if it was because it didn't really work with the schedules for other people because they had Friday off or whatever and nobody else did. I mean, it's a telling example, even though it's a sample size of one, where the option to work only 4 days was given and it was rejected if the hours remained the same. Now, I think most people, if it was a 4-day work week and hours were reduced, that more people would have agreed to that. But I'll be honest with you, I mean, there are a number of people that work for us that they want every hour they can get and they want every hour of overtime they can get. So again, it's really hard to generalize because different people have different priorities, different people have different financial situations, and different people are just wired differently. And for that reason, I don't think there's one size fits all in terms of trying to shift to a 4-day work week. So I made a video on remote work and how that has impacted the workplace. I think the concept or the practice of remote work ties into a 4-day work week. I think there are going to be many changes to the workplace. I think it's going to be not just a hybrid in terms of in-person versus remote. I think it's going to be a hybrid in terms of in-person versus remote versus how many work days per week. I think the most flexible of employers, I think there's potential that they would go to a 4-day work week and 100% remote work. I think that those will definitely be at one end of the continuum, but come on, it's possible. I also think that there are going to be those that are going to be very traditional for a long time, and it's going to be 5 days in the office, at least 8 hours per day, and all in-person work. This is not just the US. I think that this is definitely going to be variations of this will play out in other countries across the world. If you look at economies and cultures like in Japan, I think a concept of working fewer hours and fewer days, I think that would take much longer to get adopted in a culture like that of Japan than perhaps it would in the US culture or definitely a culture like some European countries. Even with remote work, we talk about hybrid, and I like hybrid because it has a connotation of flexibility, and I think that that's going to be a key in any longer term change to the workplace. I think there needs to be flexibility, and one way that I think there might be flexibility is if we don't go to an entirely 4-day work week, but we do like a staggered 4 days one week and 5 days the next. The appeal to that is that, sure, every other week you have a 3-day weekend for those folks that work that schedule. But more importantly, from the employer's perspective, it would conceivably allow you to stay open 5 days a week, every week. The employees that work the 4-day work week would have to be staggered so that, maybe not all of one department is only working 4 days that week. And that adds to the, logistical challenges and scheduling challenges. But again, in today's workplace, my personal belief is that the employers that are willing to make the effort to allow for flexibility are the ones that are going to be rewarded by having people that want to work there. And for the employees that are already there, the employers will be rewarded by employees staying there longer and being happier and hopefully more productive. As a business owner, speaking for myself personally, I like my job. I like what I do. And, the question is, if I had the option to go to a 4-day work week, would I do that? And I can't say that I would. I would love to hear your comments or your thoughts as to what you would prefer. Send me an email or leave a comment. But, if you had the option, would you in fact go to a 4-day work week? Another question I'd love to hear your thoughts on is, what industries is a 4-day work week best suited for? Again, feel free to email me, leave a comment. As always, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.